Okay. Okay. Thanks, Ken, for making an appearance on the Industrious Illumination Show and explaining U.S. tariffs of 2025 and explaining what they need to know about them because there's a lot of people that miss the point here. Everybody thinks that Donald Trump's doing a great job. Go on with your presentation and tell me why he's not doing a good job.
Okay, next slide, please.
Yep. There it is.
Next slide, please. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Martin Baer. I'm a customs and international trade attorney, and I'm with an office here in New Jersey. They call the law office of Martin K. Baer. I'm moved to practice in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, and before the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey and the U.S. Court of International Trade. As far as my past goes, I'm a former U.S. Customs officer, and I was stationed at land, air, and seaports of entry. In addition to that, I'm a former special agent for the Department of Defense. I'm a former prosecutor, and right now I teach international trade. I teach it at New Jersey City University, but in the past I've taught at Pace University, I've taught at Baruch College, Fashion Institute of Technology, and I'm also associated with a law firm and happens to be located in Texas, GRVR Attorneys, and they're a customs and international trade firm. Next slide, please.
I'm
Okay, I'm going to be talking to you about tariffs. And a lot of people have heard the word tariffs. They don't really know what the word tariff means. In a nutshell, it means tax. And this presentation today is going to cover the meaning, purpose, historical, and legal background of U.S. tariffs, something that you've been hearing a lot about. And we're going to talk about recent developments, including the Trump's tariffs. Again, on July 9th, we were supposed to hear all about them, and it looks like the tariff date has been pushed back yet again. So next slide, please. Okay, what is a tariff? Well, as I mentioned, a tariff is simply a tax, and it's imposed by a government on goods imported from other countries. The word tariff comes from an Arabic word, and it actually means inventory. And it's come into the English language by way of, well, a number of languages, including Italian, French, and of course Arabic. And again, the word originally meant notification or inventory, and it was also the name of a town or a city on the Mediterranean. And when ships passed, they were held up on occasion because the pirates wanted money. And if they received money, they let the ship pass on. But again, the word is now with us, and it's you hear it every day on the news. And again, when it comes to tariffs, who pays them? They're going to be paid by importers. Those people are importing goods into the United States. And again, they're going to influence the price that you pay for them. It's a tax. And who pays them? Again, American importers pay for them. You've heard the president say that the Chinese and people from other countries are going to pay these tariffs. That's not true. In particular, with respect to the People's Republic of China. Again, they're not going to pay these tariffs. They can't. They're paid by U.S. importers. Next slide, please. Now, there are different types of tariffs. There's one that's known as an ad valorem tariff, and that's based on a percentage of value of the goods coming into the United States. Everything has a cost, everything has a price. And customs, when customs and border protection talks about value, they're referring to the price paid or payable between buyer and seller. That's really customs value. And based upon the declared value of the goods, the United States government may, if there's duty due on those goods, may impose an ad valorem tariff, and that means it's a percentage. So if goods worth $100 and there's a 10% rate of duty on them, it means that the importer record's going to pay what? Going to pay $10. There's also specific tariffs, and those are a fixed amount per unit. It could be like I have in front of you an example, $1.22 per kilogram, let's say a kilogram of cheese. And then it's compound tariffs. and that's a combination of ad valorem and specific. And when goods are brought into the United States, sometimes they're subject to what's known as a tariff rate quota. And that is after a certain import limit is reached, additional duties or taxes are applied to items then imported. And please note, these structures affect import costs differently. Okay, next slide, please. There's something called anti-dumping duties. Maybe you've heard of them. Again, they've been applied for a long, long time, and they're basically a type of penalty. And it's a tax imposed on imported goods that are sold at prices lower than their fair market value. Many goods come into the United States. Quite often, domestic industries here complain to the government stating that, hey, these goods are coming in cheap. They're coming in at prices at which they really shouldn't be coming in. And why? The allegation is that somebody's helping exporters send the goods into the United States at less than fair market value. They're given some kind of assistance. That's the claim. And the government will investigate and it can make a determination as to whether or not there's dumping. And again, the idea behind dumping, again, is that, the allegation is that certain exporters want to bring goods into the United States, less than fair market value. After a while, they'll capture the market and then they'll increase the rates of their prices. Now, again, we get a lot of complaints from domestic industries here. The government investigates and then comes up with a determination as to whether or not there is dumping. If there is dumping, the United States Department of Commerce issues an order to Customs. U.S. Customs and Border Protection is basically playing cop. And Commerce says to Customs, hey, when these certain goods come in, apply these penalties. These goods are going to come in with a penalty because, and you're going to apply it because the goods are coming at less than fair market value. So it's a penalty. Think of anti-dumping duty that way. Next slide, please. Something called a countervailing duty. It's a lot like an anti-dumping duty. Again, the allegation is that goods are coming into the United States from overseas at less than fair market value. And again, the idea is that foreign goods are somehow benefiting from government subsidies. In this case, the government is involved, and that's when we have countervailing duties. When it comes to anti-dumping, we're talking about private entities giving help to exporters. In this case, countervailing, always think of government when you hear countervailing. And they're designed to, both anti-dumping and countervailing, to level the playing field for domestic producers by offsetting the advantage gained from these subsidies. So if these entities get help, the exporters get help, again, the idea is to offset that help and make it fair to domestic industry here. Next slide, please. Purposes of tariffs. Again, tariffs are supposed to have a purpose. What do? Yes, they raise revenue. And that's why they're historically significant. That's what they do. Traditionally, U.S. Customs officers collected what? Import taxes. They were tax collectors. They still are. U.S. Customs and Border Protection now has multiple missions, but one of their primary missions happens to protect the revenue, actually collect the revenue. There's also the idea behind anti-dumping and countervailing duties to protect domestic industries. And then there is retaliation in trade disputes. You've heard the news. President Trump is complaining that other countries are not acting fairly with the United States. And he's imposing duties, and he's threatening that if countries impose duties on the United States, that's retaliation. And retaliation always takes place when one country imposes duties on another unfairly or basically without negotiations. Again, what do tariffs do? They can influence foreign behavior. It will have an effect on what's going to be sent into the United States, what can be exported here. Now, again, exporters don't have very high profit margins. Say the same thing about the importers of record. Those people who are importing goods into the U.S. have to have what's known as a bond. And if they're importing goods at more than $2,500, that's what's known as a formal entry. And again, these importers have bonds which permit them to import. And the importers may just say, listen, with these rates of duty, I can't afford to import these items. I can't afford to pay this kind of tax and make a profit. So what you're going to be seeing in the very near future is a lot of importers not bringing goods into the United States. And it can also be felt right now. There's a lot of warehouses right now where there's not a heck of a lot going on because, again, exporters and importers have not been engaged in international trade, at least when it comes to bringing goods into the United States. Why? Because there's uncertainty over tariffs. What are they going to be? You might have heard recently, today, and today's July 12th, 2025, that there are now new duties with respect to Mexico. What are the duties? They're 30%, and they're going to be applied to to the European Union. In addition to that, we have Canada. Recently, President Trump indicated that tariffs on Canadian goods are going to be 25%. And when it comes to Brazil, what is the rate of duty? Well, just a few days ago, the president decided that the duty rate should be 50% for those goods that are coming in from Brazil. And again, the idea of tariffs, at least in the minds of many officials, is to level the playing field. Historically, that's the concept behind tariffs, in addition to raising revenue. And the purpose of a tariff can shift with political and economic priorities. And we've been seeing a lot of that right now. So in another month, we're going to find out about additional countries, what's going to happen with them. And there's a lot of countries out there that's not very happy with the United States. Historically, the United States has used tariffs as a primary source of government revenue. That's true. That was done before the income tax, and that was the income tax came about in 1913. At that time, it only affected a very small number of people in the United States, but that's how the United States used to raise revenue. And it was through U.S. customs, it was through tariffs. And that's how so much was built here in the United States, particularly before World War One. But again, tariffs rates right now are increasing. They're historically high levels, and they are going to have an effect on the American public. Next slide, please. Export tariffs or duties. Where are the tariffs mentioned? Where do they come from? Now, for those of you who read the U.S. Constitution, you might have come across the export clause, and that's Article 1, Section 9, Clause 5. And that prohibits Congress from imposing any kind of tax or duty on goods exported from any state. So on the outbound side, when it comes to sending goods overseas, no duties, no taxes that are leaving the country. Okay, if goods are leaving the country, but it's a different story when goods come into the country. Now, with respect to Article 1, Section 9, Clause 5, this clause was primarily intended to protect the interests of southern states, and they feared that northern states might gain control of Congress and use taxes on exports to disproportionately benefit themselves. So it's never happened. We don't have taxes on exported goods. Next slide, please. Now, here's a brief history of United States tariffs. One tariff that you might have heard of, most people have not, however, is the Tariff Act of 1789. There's another one known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, and many more people are probably familiar with that one. That happened during America's Great Depression. And what did the Smoot-Hawley Act do? Well, it raised tariffs. And some people indicate and believe that it led to a worsening of the Great Depression. But before I talk any more about that, I'd just like to mention the Tariff Act of 1789. And it was one of the first major pieces of legislation passed by the newly formed U.S. Congress. And it was designed by President George Washington. It came about in 1789 and established a system of tariffs, or taxes, as I mentioned. And primarily was to generate revenue for the federal government, and it did so. And then the next landmark case, as I mentioned, is the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. And that was officially known as the United States Tariff Act of 1930. And it's a law passed by the U.S. Congress that significantly raised tariffs on imported goods into the United States. And what did it do? Well, Congress thought it would protect American farmers and business people from foreign competition. It really did more than that. Again, it's widely considered by many people to have worsened the Great Depression. And there's something called the Reciprocal Trade Agreement Act that happened in 1934, and it was renewed in 1939, I believe. And it's a U.S. law that empowered the president to negotiate basically trade agreements with countries, and it's designed to reduce tariffs. Right now, we have a president who wants to increase tariffs. This act back in 1934 was designed to reduce it. Then we have another trade act, and it's called the Trade Act of 1974. And it's a U.S. law that was focused and still is focused on expanding international trade and reducing trade barriers and addressing unfair trade practices. And it granted the president the authority to negotiate trade agreements. Now, when it comes to tariffs, please think that Congress is supposed to be the primary actor when it comes to tariffs. Unfortunately, Congress has given away a number of powers over the decades. One, and when it comes to war, you know that it's supposed to be Congress that can declare war, not the president. But the last constitutional war in the United States was in 1942. It was the United States declaring war against Romania. And over the years, again, when it comes to declaring war, it's been a little bit more difficult for Congress to act. Same thing with tariffs. Congress has given away much of its powers with respect to tariffs to the president. However, the allegations are right now by many people here in the United States that the president is appropriating powers with respect to tariffs unconstitutionally. He's declaring emergencies where there really are no emergencies and then states that, hey, I have the power to impose tariffs. And Congress has been cut out of the loop, basically removed from any talk, any discussions about tariffs right now. These, again, there are a number of court cases pending right now, and there have been some court cases, court decisions recently made by one is the Court of International Trade with respect to the president, and he hasn't fared too well. Stated that maybe, again, he's grabbed on too much power. And Trump has imposed tariffs in 2018, and we know about 2025 tariffs. Back in April, he declared that he would put a 90-day moratorium on the announcement with respect to future tariffs. The big day was supposed to be July 9th, and now it's supposed to be sometime in August. And that's when the president is going to come forth and announce new tariffs on goods coming into the United States and which countries are affected. Now, please note, U.S. tariff policy evolved from protectionist roots to liberalized trade, and then it's gone back towards protectionism over the years, and that's what we have right now. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Congress has the power to lay and collect duties. This is where you find it in the United States Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution outlines the powers of the U.S. Congress to um, ability to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. And this grants Congress the power to set tariffs again, it's a tax on imported goods. This is where the power is. It's in the Constitution, and it's specifically given to Congress. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Um, Again, there are, since Trump has come into power, he's been imposing additional duties on China. Some of may remember that duties went as high as 145%. There are additional duties on the European Union that came out, I believe, yesterday or today, and that is the goods that are coming into the United States from the European Union. The duty rate is going to be 10%. Mexico, the Mexicans are very upset about that. The duty rate is going to be 30%. And again, what's being targeted right now, there's a lot of different items that could come into the United States and would be very useful to the American people. One of them happens to be electric vehicles. I don't know if you know it, but China, the People's Republic of China, makes a very good car, BYD. It's an electric vehicle. It sells for about $30,000 in China. And the United States has imposed 100% tariffs on those vehicles coming into the U.S. So if you wanted that type of vehicle, it would cost you $60,000. In Europe, 25% of all the vehicles on the road are Chinese made. And again, the idea is to get behind electric, when the United States seems to be fixated on oil, on combustion engines, and so on. What else is being affected by tariffs? Semiconductors, steel, aluminum, solar panels. But as we heard with the duties on goods coming in from Brazil, coffee. All right, coffee prices may skyrocket. There's a 50% duty on goods coming in from Brazil. Now, the 2025 tariffs position is protective. or retaliatory tools. So also the president has indicated with these additional tariffs, manufacturing is going to come back to the United States. While I would like to see that, it's highly doubtful. Why? Because to do business in the United States is expensive, and we don't have an industrial policy. And not only that, but businesses are not apt to set up operations in the United States if they don't know what the tariff rates are going to be. When it comes to vehicles, you have to think about, a lot of goods are assembled or vehicles are assembled in the United States, but they're made from car parts that are made overseas. And some vehicles, it's as much as 60, 80%. How can a company make money if the tariffs on these goods are going to be so they're coming in from Mexico? 25, 30%, Canada, I mean, 35%. How is that possible? It's really not. And again, you've probably seen it in the supermarkets right now, the price of foods. And you think about how much food is imported into the US. 94% of all fish come from abroad. And the United States is importing more in the way of fruits and vegetables. And again, what happens if additional taxes are imposed upon these products? It means that a lot of people are going to have to find money to pay for these goods, and the average American is living paycheck to paycheck. So it's going to be particularly disastrous when these tariffs do take effect or if they're felt on a lot of people in the United States. It's estimated that when it comes to low income families, they could be spending as much as 33,400 additional dollars a year on just the items that they need. All right, next slide, please. Okay, there are tariff acts that the United States government is relying on, specifically President Trump. One of them happens to be a tariff known as Section 201. And again, I really don't want to spend a lot of time with this. You can look it up, you go online, you can use Google. But there's a Section 232 that in particular has to do with national security. What is national security? It's something that's never been defined. And the president is basically stating that there are emergencies such as fentanyl coming across the border from Canada or Mexico. And because of fentanyl and because of Mexicans coming across the border, well, that's a national emergency. And because of that, the president claims it's his right to impose new taxes, new tariffs on goods coming from countries such as Canada and Mexico. And again, there's another section that the president relies upon, Section 301. This has to do with unfair trade practices, and it particularly affects the People's Republic of China. And then there's another act that the president is relying upon, and that's the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. And it has to do with economic threats constitute a declared national emergency. Now, a lot of people are saying, what is this national emergency? Really? People crossing the border, that's a national emergency, or fentanyl coming in. Now, who's responsible for the fentanyl? Well, again, it's not the governments. Again, it's people or parties, within those countries. But is it really a national emergency? So again, the courts are taking a look at this right now. They're scrutinizing Trump's actions. They may rule against him. One court has already ruled against him. The Court of International Trade stated that he has appropriated power that perhaps he should not have. And that again, the idea is that, at least in the eyes of many judges and many courts, they want Congress to reposition itself and to start exercising its tariff powers again. Next slide, please. Okay, facts. Again, there have been cases before. One involved President Nixon, and he had an import surcharge. And again, there's a couple of cases. One is, the Sheeta case. I again, it is important. Basically, the courts have looked at it and said when a president is going to exercise tariff powers, again, the president has to be somewhat careful, has to be judicious in the use of tariffs. Really can't go overboard. And again, there was a limit placed on executive power under the Trading with the Enemy Act. And again, there's a principle that the courts are trying to, again, reinforce, and that's the principle that presidential trade actions must follow statutory constraints. that just because the president declares an emergency, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is one, and it doesn't necessarily mean that he has the power to do what he needs to, that he wants to do in terms of tariffs. And again, you have to think about tariffs have to be ratified by the Congress. And many of you have heard of NAFTA and you've heard of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. How was that done? That was done with Congress. There were negotiations with the when it came to NAFTA 2.0, United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. Congress negotiated that. Now the president is imposing tariffs, but there's real no negotiation going on here. The president is basically looking for revenue to come into the United States coffers, the Treasury Department. And why? A lot of people have think that it's because of that big beautiful bill. The president right now has given the business community another tax break. This happened in 2017. Uh, Taxes on businesses in the United States, basically on the rich, on billionaires and millionaires, was given as really a favor. And again, it was due to expire, and the president has decided that millionaires and billionaires need further tax relief. Now, tax relief is not really going to be going to the people, little people of the United States, working class, but again, billionaires who really don't need money, don't spend it, extra money. They don't really, it doesn't really do much for them. They're getting huge tax breaks. And again, this is going to affect the American public. What are we talking about? We're talking about there might be severe cutbacks. There will be when it comes to food stamps, when it comes to Medicare, when it comes to Medicaid. We're not going to feel those effects until the year 2026. And that's going to be after midterm elections. And a lot of people out there in America do not know about what has happened with the great big beautiful bill that has recently been passed. They don't know what's in it. So right now the president is looking for revenue. One of the reasons too is because he wants to do away with the Internal Revenue Service. Again, the idea is that the super rich are not to be taxed, and indeed they haven't been taxed for many years. You're talking 40, 50 years. That's when the corporations, the very wealthy, have stopped paying taxes. So their money is not going into coffers, and that's one of the reasons that America has been having problems, and that's why it can be explained in part the derangement of America is in large part because of the lack of money. People are not doing very well. Next slide, please. Okay, we have a case going before the United States Court of International Trade. That's a federal court established under Article 3 of the Constitution. It's also known as the Customs Court. That's what it used to be called. And it has nationwide jurisdiction over civil actions related to customs and international trade laws. The judges there are experts on when it comes to tariffs. They know what's going on. And they recently ruled against the Trump administration. They found that sometimes tariffs, especially under Section 301, they were legally deficient. Why? Because there were all kinds of procedural missteps. What's the outcome? Some modifications were ordered, but tariffs were largely upheld. And the CIT affirms that while the executive has authority, that authority must follow legal and procedural guidelines. And that's the complaint when it comes to President Trump, that he's not following legal and procedural guidelines. Next slide, please. Okay, China. What can we expect in the very near future? Well, we know that there's going to be problems with China. China is indeed, a world power right now, and it is a member of BRICS. Some of you may be familiar with that. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and other countries. Basically, it's a counterweight to the United States. They're looking to do away with the United States having the dollar as the reserve currency of the world, and they've banded together. And again, when it comes to China, China's been pretty quiet about things, but China is really the factory of the world right now. And I cannot figure out what's going to happen if duties as high as 50% on many of the items, steel 25 to 50%, or batteries at 25%. I mentioned electric vehicles before, and that's 100% rate of duty. That was even under Biden. Biden, a Democrat, had decided that it was appropriate that for electrical vehicles coming in from China, those made in China, that they should be taxed at 100% duty. And all Trump did was continue that policy. The European Union, again, today we heard that products coming in from the European Union, they're manufactured there, produced, harvested there. they're going to be coming in at 10% rate of duty. Mexico and Canada, we know that those countries are very upset with the United States right now. And there's going to be retaliatory tariffs by all the countries that I'm mentioning. And what can you expect in the very near future? You can expect rising trade tensions, especially with China. Okay, China is in many ways in the driver's seat. It's not going away. We have some people advocating war with China. I don't know how that happens, but even the US Navy is talking about war with China by 2027. I don't know why. Maybe we should try some kind of agreements with China. We try talking to it. But we also have some problems here in the United States with respect to certain imports that have to do with solar, that have to do with wind, and so on. Right now, the emphasis is on oil and gas again. And it's going to make it very difficult for products or items coming into the United States that have to do with, as I mentioned, solar. Solar panels, in some cases, are taxed at a rate of 1,500%. Truly insane, but that's what it is. Next slide, please. Okay, what are these increased tariffs going to mean? Well, for manufacturers, they're going to be higher input costs. It's going to be more costly for people trying to, again, anybody trying to export goods to the United States. The importers are going to wind up paying these taxes, if you've heard. Again, other outside countries, foreign countries don't pay these tariffs. People here do. Will there be supply chain disruptions? You betcha there will be. And it's going to be, again, global competitive. It's going to be reduced. Why should goods be coming into the United States how they were being brought in when the duty rates are so high? Again, how can you make a profit if you're going to be taxed at 25% or 35%? How can a U.S. importer do that? And tariffs do raise production costs. Not only we're talking about goods that are made or assembled here. I mentioned automobiles. A lot of automobile parts are made abroad. They come in and they could be taxed at, they were being taxed at 2.5% for many countries. Now they're going to be taxed in some cases at 50%. How can you make a profit if you're doing that? And what we're seeing right now is some companies, looking at their bottom line and saying to themselves, with this kind of uncertainty, we really don't want to continue operations in the United States, so we're not going to build any new factories here because we don't know what the future is going to bring. We don't have a crystal ball, and we don't want to deal with situations when um, these tariffs are so high. So a lot of uncertainty. Uncertainty is fatal. Is again, is fatal to business. Next slide, please. Okay, there's going to be higher prices for consumers when it comes to cars, when it comes to electronics, when it comes to appliances. And again, it's going to cause inflation. A lot of people were angry. That's one of the reasons that Trump got into office was because people were fed up with dealing with inflation. Too high. People are not making the kind of money that they need to be able to survive, very nicely. Again, it's going to be reduced consumer choice. A lot of items that were coming into the United States will not be coming into the United States. And while tariffs aim to help domestic producers, consumers often bear the brunt through higher retail prices. And I think that's what you're going to see at places like Walmart's, and you're going to see that at Costco, et cetera. There's going to be increased tariff prices. There are going to be increased prices and inflation for such things as I mentioned on all kinds of imports. Businesses importing goods subject to tariffs are likely to pass these costs on to who? They're basically going to pass them on to you, the consumer. And that's going to be in the form of higher prices in these stores. Now, higher costs across various categories, Americans can anticipate, well, paying more for groceries, paying more for clothing, paying more for household items. And again, I mentioned auto parts and also recreational goods too. And again, there are going to be potential price increases in such things as, SUVs, because a lot of them come in from Mexico. And there's going to be inflationary effects. Experts, including Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, who's also under a lot of pressure right now by the president, who can't stop basically criticizing him, has indicated that new tariffs can contribute to higher inflation rates. And that's something that nobody wants. So the overall cost to households, there's something at Yale called the Budget Lab, and they estimate that these tariffs could Again, they could increase prices by 2 or 3 percentage points, potentially costing American households on the average of, I mentioned before, 3,000. It's actually $3,800 a year. That's how much more money will have to be spent by American consumers. Basically, you talk about low-income consumers. They're going to have to pay that much money. Impact on specific goods. I mentioned groceries. Since the United States relies on imports for a significant portion of its food supply, I'm talking about 55% of all fresh fruit right now comes in from abroad, 32% of fresh vegetables, and as I mentioned earlier, 94% of all fish come from abroad. Electronics, you're going to be paying more for electronics. Such things as iPhones, iPads, and laptops, they're going to increase in price. Cars, well, again, I mentioned electric vehicles. Everybody wants them, or many people do, not everybody. Some people hate the idea of them. But again, the American consumer could have very nice automobiles, electric at $30,000, but because of the import taxes, well, it's another 100% on it. So if the car is coming in at $30,000, the consumer would have to pay $60,000. So there are going to be supply chain disruptions, definitely, and there's also going to be a decline in, I believe, in quality of a lot of goods because companies are going to have no choice. They've got to pay attention to the bottom line, so they're going to start substituting materials, and these materials, generally speaking, are going to be of lower quality because they've got to bring in things a bit more cheaply, and you can't use quality goods if the prices or the import taxes are very high. So there's going to be uncertainty. And again, if you want to find more about this, you can go to something online called the Yale Budget Lab, and you can look up some of the things that I've been talking about, what to expect in the very near future. Next slide, please. Yeah, if you want to find more about tariffs, you can go to, well, there's something called the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States, and it's maintained by, it's called the U.S. International Trade Commission. If you printed out this great big book, it's we weigh about 16 and a half pounds. It gives the classification of all the goods coming into the United States, also with their duty rates. Again, if you have insomnia, it might be a good idea to consult this book. Most people, it's terribly boring, but it contains all the information that you need about goods coming into the US. And you can also find information about tariffs by going to the WTO Tariff and Trade Data Platform and the Customs Info Database. That's through Descartes. And again, go to the International Trade Administration. They have something called they have a tariff tool there, and you can go to www.ita.gov. Next slide, please. Okay. Just remember that tariffs, as you know, they're complex and they're complex tools with wide-ranging impacts. And a lot of people are not fully apprised of what they mean, their significance. And many people are still laboring under with the belief that other countries are going to pay duties. It's not going to happen. Never has. It'd be legal, as a matter of fact, if countries wanted to pay tariffs on these goods. Who are they paid by? They're paid by importers. Americans wind up paying these taxes. And the increase in taxes, well, they passed on to you, the consumer. All right, so just start thinking about, some legal and economic implications. If when it comes to just trying to understand international trade and trying to understand what's going to be going on at the local supermarket or Walmart or Costco, prices are going to be increased, and you're going to ask yourself why. Well, you know why. It's because of the tariffs that's being imposed on these goods that are in Walmart. When it comes to goods that you purchase at Walmart, I think 99.999% of all the items in a Walmart are made abroad. Very little is made here in the United States right now, and that's something that some people still haven't gotten over. But check the materials, check the goods that you're going to buy. You should look for country of origin marking on it, and you'll see where these goods are produced. Now, Walmart does have some items that are made in the United States. Some women from Pennsylvania did a survey recently. They went to a Walmart, I believe, in New Jersey, and they found 3 items made in the United States. They happen to be candy. So it's bad. The United States does not manufacture the way it did, and if there are going to be import duty increases, people are going to pay for that. Next slide, please. Okay, if you have any questions, I mean, you can contact me. I happen to be available. I can give you my email address. That's mkb at bearlaw.com. That's M as in Martin, K as in Kenneth, B as in bear at bearlaw.com. And I thank you for your time and attention. And I hope to present with respect to some more international trade subjects in the very near future. And again, thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening to me. Okay.
We thank you, Ken, for your time today. A very interesting topic, debatable topic too, at that, because people will say, "Oh, those tariffs aren't a big deal," but when you look at it and you add them, people are already paying high enough. They're going to burn a hole through your pocket. I mean, with these tariffs, I mean, it's not. It's it's really crazy.
Yeah, I mean, historically, the United States has had relatively low tariffs for the past few decades. The United States, again, great believer in free trade or neoliberalism. And neoliberalism had to do with lowering of tariffs, and we've also seen a lot of our industries go abroad. A lot of American companies that people are familiar with or saw in the United States on a daily basis, well, they still exist, but they really don't have operations here anymore. A lot of them moved again to the People's Republic of China or Vietnam, other places in Asia. And what are the reasons for it? Lower costs, labor costs in particular. And we have a system where profits are everything. And if you want to make the most in terms of profits, you can't do it in the United States anymore. The United States is basically it's high cost. You have to pay a lot in taxes. People need enough money so they can send their children to school, that they can buy health care in many instances because their employers don't provide it. So they need a lot of money compared to people in other countries because, again, countries overseas do a lot more for their citizens than the government does in the United States. And again, most countries around the world, you have the right to an education, a free education, or job training. We don't have that here. A lot of things that we don't have. So that's why it's more high cost to do business in the United States. You'd have to pay your workers a lot more money than you would if you go someplace else. And again, we don't have an industrial policy. So these are some of the reasons why I don't think you're going to see manufacturing return to the United States. Just my personal opinion, but you might want to do some research. Start looking at things online. Why did things change? What happened? Most people don't pay attention to international trade. It's not talked about. Most people never have discussions about that. And it's basically an esoteric area. Most people don't think about it. But these free trade agreements, neoliberalism, free markets changed everything. Okay, the United States is not the same United States it was 50 years ago. And you have to say to yourself, why? What are the chief reasons? The chief reasons, a lot of it has to do with manufacturing. We had companies here at one time that produced things. Quite often, I take the train into Philadelphia and I look out the window and I'm heartbroken at what I see, abandoned factories and buildings and so on. Philadelphia was truly dynamic, as was Trenton, as was Camden, as with any number of cities here in the United States, but they're largely abandoned, forgotten, and neglected. It didn't have to be the so, but again, nobody forced companies to move. It was all because they could make higher profits overseas. So if anybody has any questions out there, I'll gladly try to entertain you with an answer. If I don't have an answer, I'll get back to you.
They can definitely catch you on the comment screen when I put it up. They'll ask it, and if I get it, I'll just
Yeah.
it's basically a recording. So, yeah, very solid presentation and very solid points there, Ken, on everything basically. There would be some people that would probably come out, you'd agree to disagree on that, but that's the way it is because a lot of people, even my friends, have gotten hit with some of this stuff for sure.
And what I'm talking about is not really politics. It shouldn't be construed that way. It's just fact. It's what
Yeah,
happened here. It has happened. I know people pine for the America they knew. Especially many older Americans, they'd like the 1950s to be back, the 60s and so on. Even the 70s were glorious years after World War II. There's a lot of employment for certain people here. Not everybody, but on average, people did pretty well for about 30 years after World War II. And then things started to change. We had our allies overseas, countries have been devastated. They started to rebuild and they began to challenge us. They challenged us with automobiles. They challenged us in many different ways, manufacturing. And then we saw what happened in the 1990s with Bill Clinton and China. The United States helped the People's Republic of China become a member of the World Trade Organization. And what did we see after its entry into the WTO? We saw the disappearance of our wearing apparel, our clothing industries, textile, and so on. And it's very difficult to compete with China, and China also has a different type of economic system and political system where they're looking ahead. In the United States, it's basically private companies looking 90 days ahead. China, well, they look far ahead. They look years in advance and they coordinate activities with the private sector. It's unique. It's not completely public. It's not completely private. It's a mixture. And they seem to have found a balance that works for them. And then you also have other countries that, again, have rapidly expanding GDPs, experience a lot of growth, and one of those countries happens to be India. India has also experienced growth of about 7% a year. We would be happy with 2.5%. We'd be ecstatic here in the United States with a figure like that. But many countries are expanding at rates far higher than ours right now. And the balance of power is shifting. And that's something that a lot of Americans are not aware of. Where is it going? It's going towards Asia. And again, we're talking about the BRICS countries, but in particular, China's there, India's there, and that's what's been happening.